Welcome to Vitamin OC. I'm Joanna Weiss.
And I'm Whitney Gomez. Every week we bring you your recommended dose of civics and civilization in Orange County.
And today we are so excited to bring you our friend Susannah Delano, who is the Executive Director of Close the Gap, California. Under her leadership, California has shifted from a historic low point in women's representation in the state legislature to an all-time high. We now have almost half the seats in California being held by women, and it is an achievement unmatched in any other part of the country.
We'll talk to Susannah about what inspired her to dedicate her career to social justice, how Close the Gap is rewriting the playbook on representation, and why issues like menopause and women's health deserve to be on the legislative agenda.
And of course, we'll dig into what this all means for Orange County politics and the future of women in leadership throughout the state. So let's dive in.
Susannah, you've spent more than 20 years on the front lines of labor, reproductive rights, and now political representation. That's an incredible arc of public service. Thank you for everything you're doing for our state. What experiences first motivated you to get involved in social justice and equity?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on. I think everything comes back to my upbringing for me. It was definitely not intentional. I didn't grow up thinking I would go into politics, but I couldn't avoid it. My parents were both members of the clergy. They were liberal ministers with the United Church of Christ, and they were and still are community organizers. Whether it was civil rights or nuclear disarmament, feminist causes, LGBTQ rights, they exposed me from a very young age to organizing. And, I had a very rich community of people who knew how to get things done growing up. I think one of the most impactful things I did as a kid was in 1993, when I was 13 or 14, I was able to go on a trip to South Africa with a group of women. There were about 15 of us. I was the youngest and the oldest was 80, multiracial group from all over the country. And, this was the time in South Africa. Apartheid had ended. Mandela was free, but he had not yet been elected president. So it was a very volatile time, and we met with groups and individuals who had fought to get to that point in terms of overturning apartheid. It was really an honor to get to meet Ellen Kuzwayo, who wrote a book that is now part of feminist canon, and she was later elected to Congress. So the deeper I get into the world of Close the Gap, now in my 8th year, I look back on that and just that sort of understanding of how someone like Ellen Kuzwayo, who had been a social worker, a community activist, a leader with the African National Congress, went from living in a township and doing that work to being elected to Congress. Those are sort of early seeds planted. I think it really was an evolution for me that's probably generational. I was coming of age around the time of Bush versus Gore. And it wasn't until I went to work for SEIU, working with home care workers, that I really felt like I understood, the value of local and state government. But once I did, there was no turning back.
You have been affiliated with Planned Parenthood and SEIU, which is the Service Employee International Union for our listeners who don't know. Those are both powerhouses for progressive change. And you spent a lot of time there kind of cutting your teeth. What lessons did you learn early on that have served you well in your current role at Close the Gap?
I love that question. I'm probably still just becoming aware of how much it informed me. Elected office is fundamentally service to the community, and it's really a backstop against encroachments that would make people's lives worse. At SEIU, I was bargaining and doing political work and advocacy for in-home caregivers who were often way below the line of poverty in terms of their day-to-day existence. And, the county supervisors, the state level electeds who were making the decisions that would determine whether or not they would go to the dentist that year, for example, were so consequential. And then same at Planned Parenthood, not just in terms of abortion access, but the presence of sex ed in schools, the ability to fund those kinds of programs were really on the line. And so it was clear to me that the most important thing elected officials do was serve in terms of the community's need. It was something I draw on a lot from those times too, is just how important California's role is as a model, both for the independent living movement that gave rise to our long-term care funding structure of in-home care that I dealt with at SEIU, and in terms of our reproductive care reimbursement system, and just how accessible we've been able to make it in California up until the current difficulties we're having. That was nationally significant. As I met with my colleagues from other states, we really set the bar high, gave an example of what was achievable if people really prioritized issue areas like that. I think another thing that really breaks through from all of my experience in those sectors as well is just the importance of a clear, simple, unifying call to action, really being attuned to what is universal or where there's really a clear majority support. So working with reproductive health, it can often be a divisive issue, but the reality is there are clear majorities who support access to care and choice. And so I think I learned pretty early on how to tap into the messaging around that. And same for long-term care. Anyone and everyone who has taken care of someone, especially in old age, especially disabled, there's an immediacy to understanding the urgency of supporting those things that if you talk about it in the right way, brings people in, get close the gap. That universal call has been a call for parity in our legislature. Even here in progressive woke California, we were doing so poorly. When I first came to Close the Gap, women were barely 1 in 5 legislators. And so unifying people around the urgency of changing that has been core to the work I've done to build here at Close the Gap and to scale it.
You and I first met in 2018 when I was president of Women for American Values and Ethics.
I remember.
We had just come over to Close the Gap, and we met and immediately hit it off over our shared passion for electing, supporting, and organizing women. And when you joined Close the Gap, as you mentioned in 2018, there was such a need for your work, as women were about 22% of the state legislature at the time. You've done so much good work in closing that gap in the last 8 years. We're at a nearly half all-time high. Can you talk about what you think the key strategies or turning points were that made that turnaround possible?
It's taken a village of us. It's far from just Close the Gap. WAVE was part of that. We've really come such a long way. And I see that as a collective achievement for our whole state. But I'm really glad you asked, because I don't think that there was one specific moment that things changed. I think 2018, we sort of overachieved. It was a bump in large part because of Me Too. And we said enough, there were suddenly more vacancies that women could run for. That's how we got Assemblymember Luz Rivas was first elected to the Assembly. And now, of course, she's serving in Congress. I know that was a series of big wins in Orange County as well. I think Katie Porter was originally elected in that year. So that was a boost. But I think what's really made the difference is that there has been this sort of sustained, relentless work towards one single goal, cycle after cycle. Change worth winning doesn't often happen in one cycle. Even Close the Gap was really founded out of frustration by a lot of the women who worked on the 1992 Year of the Woman, that, we had risen to this point in 92 and then it was just trickling back down. So Close the Gap was really built in order to ensure that we got more than just one wave year. That focus and investment in Close the Gap's model, whether it's as a faculty member at one of our events or donating, what it's all added up to is that we were ready when that huge volume of open seats came to pass in 22 and 24. And that was when we saw the big leaps forward. We had 10 Close the Gap women elected in 22. We had 9 more elected in 24. And that's really what allowed us to take that quantum leap to where we are today, just right at the threshold of parity in the only major global economy to be that close.
It's remarkable, and hats off to you. And I remember 1992, I was 20, and it felt like such an important year in politics for women. Go back and look at some of those statistics and realize that in Congress, state legislature, we haven't made any strides in those areas since then. And that there was like a whole generation of women that kind of got left behind politically because we designated 1992 as the Year of the Women. Yep. We had 2 female senators in California, all that stuff. And then look where we are now. We've had some backsliding, some improvements in some things, like because of your work, but some backslides in some other areas.
It's a slow grind, but we deserve and will win more than just one wave. We got to be the whole ocean.
One of the things that Close the Gap is known best for is identifying women who might not otherwise see themselves in politics and helping them step into those leadership roles. Can you share with us what that recruitment process looks like and maybe an example of how you've helped to make someone make that leap?
Yeah, it's really different for each woman. And I think that is one thing that sets Close the Gap's model apart. We're not this big, open call, come get trained in one room all together. Our model is really to work one-on-one with women who are considering running. We don't require them to have decided to run in order to work with them. And that's also a feature. We just meet them where they're at in terms of, strengths, perceived weaknesses, the barriers to going forward, the knowledge gaps. That is the bulk of our work. And it's really fun and incredible to work with these women over the course of a year or more. Usually half the women that come to us have probably thought about running or maybe already serve in local office. It's less typical that we have someone who really hasn't thought about running, but I can give a number of examples. Our current Assembly Majority Leader up in Northern California, Cecilia Aguiar-Curry, had been on a small city council for years and years. It was sort of openly acknowledged that, the dudes on the council weren't doing all that much. She was running the show. There was an open seat coming up in the state assembly in 2016. Close the Gap asked for a meeting. And, she's told me since she thought we were coming to ask her to run for county supervisor. And so she was, preparing for that. And instead we said, hey, we think, you have longtime community roots in the district. You understand agriculture. This is an agricultural district. We think your profile is really strong. Would you ever consider running? And she banged her hands down on the table and said, I have been waiting for someone to ask me. And, she entered really as a spoiler in that race. There were two white men who had all the connections and all the resume in the world for people to believe that would be a given for one of them to be elected. And she duked it out and won. So at that point, is when we offer this guided one-on-one exploration. And some women, like Cecilia, didn't need much from us. Once the idea was there, she pretty much knew what to do and did it. Others take a lot more time in exploration. One more recent example is Assemblymember Sade El-Hawari from LA, who was someone that our team was connected with through activist circles. It was late 2023, and she ran and won in an assembly seat where we had really struggled to get traction. We were not finding, yes, this is it, or these are two possibilities. We're going to work with both of these women for a year. She had just come off of Mayor Bass's mayoral campaign as a youth and community liaison, has a Harvard degree, has been an educator. This was the part of LA, where the city council tapes were leaked. So Black-Brown unity in that area was incredibly important. She happens to be biracial, Afro-Latina, and she had all the preparation in the world she needed, but she never would have thought of running. I don't think at that time, at least, maybe in another 10 years, had we not approached her. And so then we spent, almost a full year in exploration with Sade. And now, she's just really breaking new ground in the assembly and won a really tough race. So those are a couple examples.
Great examples.
Those are great.
Here in Orange County, we've had a political transformation over the last decade. No longer the deep red bastion that it used to be. Still, though, for women candidates, the opportunities feel a little bit uneven. What do you see as the opportunities and challenges for female candidates in Orange County?
Yeah, things have changed a ton, and congratulations. And it's been awesome to watch. I really defer to you guys as the experts on the ground in a lot of ways. I know things about Orange County. I know that, MAGA is real, and there's definitely a wide spectrum of political sensibilities. And I think a lot of that actually impacts the local level, whether it's school board and, a lot of the kind of culture war stuff is being fought at the local level. I will say a number of women that we have approached about running for legislature in Orange County have turned us down on the basis that they need to work locally. And I get that because the stakes are really high in terms of communities that are trying to hold the line there. There's a lot of small cities in Orange County, which can be, an opportunity and a downside. I think it's harder to build a base that covers a whole district. I know there's also some cultural isolation, within all the different ethnic communities. There's maybe not always the inroads between communities and ability to put up a quick coalition that might exist other places. But you do see women, running this year for legislature. Out of Orange County, Jessie Lopez and Autumn Briseño are both assembly candidates that we've worked with. So, to some extent, I think it's the same challenges we find everywhere, but there's absolutely nuance there. And Orange County is a really, really important place for our politics.
It's interesting that you pointed out that with our smaller cities, Huntington Beach is very different than Costa Mesa, is very different than Laguna Beach. They're all in the same assembly district, whether the congressional district. And you have to find candidates who can speak to all of those different groups, because you can just drive 5 miles within Orange County and have a completely different demographic, socioeconomic background. There's not really one size fits all candidates for so many of our cities because they are so small. And then our assembly seats and our state Senate seats are gigantic. And so you can't find a homogenous group of 500,000 people within Orange County. There are so many pockets.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the media market is just as expensive as LA. So you really need to raise top dollar, even though you might be working with sort of smaller sets of communities.
With half the legislature now women in Sacramento, Can you talk to us about how that's changed, how policies are shaped, how people interact, just the culture?
This is one of the most rewarding dimensions of the work I do, is to get to go to Sacramento now and feel and see how different it is. I'm actually hoping Close the Gap has a nonpartisan entity in the works, and I'm hoping we can do a research project on this to kind of pull out some of those stories. But I was in the Capitol a couple of weeks ago, and I had coffee with one of the women who was part of the We Said Enough movement, which was sort of the California Capitol version of Me Too. And when I walked in, she just gave me a huge hug and thanked me and said, I can't tell you how different it is to work in this environment now versus then. She gave me a couple examples, and she contrasted a hot mic situation on the assembly floor, remembering back in the heyday of Me Too, a number of the members were mic'd and they were discussing an affair that one of the male members was having, and press was listening, and how that made her feel as someone who had been victimized in that sort of bro culture that the Capitol has often been. And then she contrasted that with a session she had just come from where everyone was mic'd and discussing perimenopause, including the men. Because there's so many exciting bills coming out. She just said, I can now say that this is a good place to work for me. I think in terms of the larger culture, that's real. There's smaller things like the official cars for members didn't used to have car seats in them. Going back to the old culture, you could have your mistress picked up in your car, but you couldn't have your kids picked up from childcare. My understanding is that our next Senate President Pro Tem, Monique Limon, found a way to change that. The Women's Caucus has never been this big or powerful. Their legislative packages and budget priorities carry that much more weight. I think, the half-life of legislative power is long. Like, it takes a while to sort of see the cumulative impact, but definitely, in reproductive health, having that strong of a women's caucus helped. When Roe fell, California had been preparing, and we were ready with a suite of legislative bills that were totally informed by the Future on Abortion Council. And once again, setting that standard high and making sure that not only were we continuing to ensure access and broaden it throughout California, but that we were ready to take on patients and allow doctors from states like Arizona to practice here and to continue to be a refuge and a sanctuary. I could go on, and it's really cool to see it happening in real time.
That'd be so rewarding. I'm glad that you're getting that feedback from members too. That's wonderful.
Absolutely. I shouldn't sugarcoat it. I know one of our newly elected class of 24 members was routinely not recognized as a member by a lot of the lobbyists. That's been going on forever, especially with some of the younger women. It's like the Capitol just couldn't come to terms with the idea that this was the member. But what I heard was this one particular member, there was a whole community of her staff and allies and advocates that she worked with would make it a point to say, "Oh, hello, assembly member," very clearly and loudly whenever she would walk through the hall. And we heard stories about in the Obama White House when, the women who were sick of men not listening and then repeating what they were saying as if it was their own idea and taking credit, would made a kind of a pact to repeat what the woman had said in the meeting and just really amplify it in that way. I think you see faster progress on stuff like that than you used to, and it's shifting. The thing I hear the most from women members now is there's less ego, there's more getting shit done. That's the easiest way to sum it up. There's still competing agendas, there's still cliques, but there's so much more emphasis on how do we actually solve problems, which is what all the research tells us that women focus on. Disagreements, oftentimes women have taken the time to build the relationship to solve those disagreements, whereas before, it would have been more of a just a power struggle. I know, one member of the legislature went through breast cancer recently in the past few years. When she made that announcement, the Women's Caucus surrounded her and said, "We've got you. We're going to make sure your priority bills stay up. You take care of yourself." Stuff like that is really moving.
That's great. Great stories. We appreciate those anecdotes. And you have great informative emails that I love that discuss Close the Gap's work, and it keeps me informed. And while you're working for gender parity, you're also looking at issues and elevating those issues that affect women's lives, like menopause-related litigation. Can you tell us why this issue is important to close the gap, and let us know what kind of change you hope to see by tackling this?
For sure. Yeah. And thank you for the warm words. I have to shout out Dr. Sarah Carson, who is our research director and also writer-in-chief. She runs that email program, and we've been getting such good feedback. She does an incredible job. And we're a tiny team, so we're a little daunted by taking on policy sometimes. We're not a policy shop. We can't survey the entire body of legislation, but with issues like menopause and perimenopause, it really rises to the top because it's why we do what we do. Policy can ignite a cultural moment that literally changes reality for millions. And that's something, personally that I've been grappling with at age 46 over the last 6 months on the same timeline as a lot of this stuff has caught fire. That's why we do what we do. It's sort of the epitome of what's at stake and what the possibilities are when women take seats at the table. Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, who authored one of the big bills, did it out of frustration. I mean, I had this experience. I had all this joint pain and we were doing all this imaging and we were seeing if I might be developing a profile for some other longer term condition. And never once did it occur to my medical team to say, hey, you might be experiencing perimenopause and there's this thing called frozen shoulder. The bills that are addressing how does the medical community need to prepare to recognize the signs and to treat them, how do employment situations recognize that. It couldn't be more important. I don't know if you guys have read the Miranda July book, All Fours. In a lot of ways, it's about perimenopause. I read it before I realized that was what was happening to me. It's wacky and hilarious and brilliant, but I heard her interviewed. She revealed that she wrote that during a time of being really frustrated and angry about the Trump presidency and about the rollback of reproductive rights, and that she was actually trying to figure out a way to resist. So she's really annoyed by all these people who are like, wow, this woman wrote a book and she just is so surprised and can't believe that it blew up. And she's like, no, I knew what I was doing. And I think that's really powerful because in some ways, it's like we're all trying to carve out ways to keep progress rolling, even with one hand tied behind our back in these current times. So that's one really big, meaningful part about that wave of legislation. And it's absolutely relevant to close the gap and the promise of if women can take equal seats at the decision-making table, how many things that we never thought to question might change.
Well, California is now the only top global economy to have achieved parity in the legislature, which is incredible. So again, congratulations to you and your organization.
To all of us, thank you.
What lessons from California do you think can be applied to other states? And what unique conditions do you think were special to allow California to create that progress?
The strategy we've used here was tailor-made for California. We've always known that there was this big wave of open seats coming. We've called it the mother load. We have term limits. We're one of only, I think, 16 states that has term limits. And we really zeroed in on those as like the best opportunity for any newcomer, whether it's a woman or not, to come in and run without having to deal with an incumbent. In a lot of ways, that is perfect for California. But we had a research study come out from the Center for American Women in Politics recently about our model. And that report, as well as coverage of it in Forbes and LA Times, has really lifted out that it is a model that's ripe for replication. And we're excited about possibilities of using it, in other places, because I think it's actually rare that an organization spends as much time on an individual basis with prospective candidates. And that really sets our model apart. And that's where the magic comes in a lot of ways, in my mind, is just having that safe, constructive, structured space to explore the possibility of running. So I think that's key. The allyship and community embrace of the call to parity is key, and that can happen in more states. You set a simple goal, a simple metric that has universal appeal, and people find ways to be part of that. And that then has an impact on their own prioritization of women. We've had progressive groups tell us we weren't really thinking about gender when we were thinking about our endorsements or our candidate recruitment, and you guys make us do that. And that's, one of the value adds there, I think, for all of us when we get involved in kind of an urgent call like that. Around something that's measurable and we can get there together. I think there's lots of opportunities in other venues, whether it's state legislature or up ballot or down ballot, to take that long game approach that we have, take a whole decade plus and say, what are the best opportunities here for us to change things? We've been looking at some swing states lately in terms of their volume of open seats, and we see a couple windows that are similar to California in terms of like, wow, almost the entire legislature is going to turn over in this short amount of time. If we can get a bunch of women ready in the right places at the right time, we might really be able to change things on the ground there.
Terrific.
We've talked a lot about the numbers and percentages, but equity isn't just about percentages. Sometimes it is also about power and impact. And you've mentioned a little bit about the Close the Gap, maybe looking at other states, but what is your next big frontier, and what does true equity in political leadership look like to you?
Such a huge question, especially right now. We really are pushing ourselves to meet the moment. We are looking in other states, and we're going to have an announcement in November. We're having a big event in San Francisco where we'll announce what's next for us in terms of piloting our model in some new venues. We're also really interested in down ballot because, in a lot of ways, we focus on the state legislature at the outset for a reason, which is that it's like the midsection of the pipeline, and I think The fact that we're at a low now in terms of our members of Congress who are women, to me, that's a delayed reflection of that middle section at the state dropping so low to a 20-year low at the end of 2017. Now we're back. Women are in the right place to run for Congress. When we think about what needs to happen in order for California to maintain this all-time high and this parity measure that we've gotten to, we have to look even further down the bench and make sure that county boards of supervisors, that school boards, that city councils, are also building in that space so that more of them can run for state leg and more of them can run for Congress, of course. And of course, we'll get to the White House one day. We have a 1C3 entity right now, and it's called the Power and Parity Institute. And that's because what good is parity if it doesn't come with power to actually affect change? And so longer term, I think we're really interested in providing research and programming that's unique, that doesn't replicate stuff that is being offered in other parts of the country. But the interest is really, how do women change culture? How do we make politics less toxic? How do we make it more responsive and effective? What can, a new demographic really coming into its own add to the rescues and updates that our democracy so badly needs? I'm really excited to get to that. We've got our hands full right now with redistricting and some dominoes coming out of that. But long term, I'm really excited. And I had dinner last November with a couple of women in my hometown who had won local election, and they had already gotten their feet wet. And I thought we were just going to celebrate. They won. It was amazing. They broke new ground, but they wanted to work. They were like, now we're in. We see the water we're swimming in. We want to be powerful and impactful, but we don't want to assimilate. We don't want to take on the same sort of toxic, approach to policymaking, siloed, isolated, ego-driven that we see coming before us. How do we do this? And, they're asking me and Close the Gap for help on that front. And, I'm so used to running such a bare bones operation. For so long, we were only just 1 or 2 staff and a lot of volunteers. I'm so disciplined about saying, we can't drift into another lane, but we really are coming to a point now, thanks to investment and the success of this larger movement, that we are able to take on challenges like that. So, and think more longer term about what we might be able to offer. So it's exciting.
Really, truly is exciting. We're so grateful to you for joining us in helping California achieve that historic success. And I also wanted to let our listeners know that you have recently been awarded 100 Most Influential Leaders here in California, and it's very well earned. If anyone would like to learn more about Close the Gap, you can visit closethegapca.org. And don't forget to follow and like Vitamin OC in wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Susannah, it was so nice to meet you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us for your recommended dose of civics and civilization in Orange County.
And we'll see you next time on Vitamin OC.